Hey folks, Les here, and so this is a quick tip video where I'm going to be hanging out for a little bit and kind of capturing some of the work that I'm doing on a piece of clothing. And it doesn't really matter about what it is, it's really just a good example piece to kind of show some work on skin weights and show some problem areas people run into quite often. I know I run into these all the time. So here I'm looking at a piece of clothing. It's just kind of a little generic thing that I put together just for this. But here we've got some problem areas coming up around the legs, and the thighs and the groin area are almost always where you're going to run into some sticky issues. And one of the things that I run into a lot there that is a little confusing and a little weird is that when you're working with the Genesis figures, they have a lot of joint control morphs built into them. And there are lots of times when you'll think that a problem you're having is a skin weight issue, when really it's not. Really it is a joint control morph issue where the morphs are auto-generated going into the clothing. So when you have those joint control morphs, they're auto-generated, and so the deformation of the mesh stacks on top of the rigging. And if you go into it thinking in terms of skin weights, then you're going to be fighting with a lot of things. Or if you go into it thinking, oh, there's a bad morph, then you're going to end up fighting with the skin weights. They go hand in hand. So it's kind of an odd process. You have to sort of use this process of elimination to figure out which one is causing a particular error in your deformations. So what I thought I would do is just kind of share as I'm working on a piece and let you sort of watch and see what I go through with that. And as I'm working on it, I found that I tried to put together some ideas and just say, well, this is how you do this. But the thing is, it varies so much from piece to piece that I think it's better to just show you as I work on something and let you kind of pick up on where I'm going to run into stumbling blocks and maybe try to highlight those as I hit them, and then say, okay, now here we've ran into a snag. Now I'm going to show you how I would work through the problem. Because I think that's way more valuable than trying to say, oh, this is definitely how you do it, because there is no definitely how you do it in this stuff. That's one of the things that drives people batty with it, is that it's so much constant experimentation. So anyway, let's jump on in here. And so I've been doing a little bit of work on this already, and it's kind of what led me to decide to use this as a nice quick video example. A couple of notes about what I have going on here. I've gone ahead and set up just a short little 5-frame animation, actually 6 frames. So at frame 0 we have the figure in its default position, and then I have a keyframe set at frame 5 that bends the left thigh up to 90 degrees. And I chose 90 degrees because that's kind of a like the figure can bend its thigh further than that, but that's pretty far. That's probably about as far as you'll usually ever bend a thigh, and beyond that is getting into some real tricky areas. And I'd rather work with this tolerance first, because this is a point where I can still kind of see around things. Like if we go on up and bend this the rest of the way up, then you're actually getting into places where the figure intersects in on itself. And that's a tricky area, and it's an area where I really think you're better off to work to the 90-degree bend and then let things intersect with themselves going the rest of the way, because the underlying figure is going to intersect with itself, so obviously the clothing is going to intersect with itself. And I found that if you work to the 90 degrees as a stopping point, that you're probably going to be okay. And it's a much easier place to see things from. So we're going to start from there, and so let's select my thigh bend on the left thigh of this garment. Okay. And here you can see I've already painted out a lot of weights. I've worked with this a little bit already. And I kind of have this one side done, and I've already kicked out my the joint control morphs that were affecting this. And so here I'm just adding a little bit more weight around the bottom. And it's a good point to note right here that this is an area where I know going in that this groin area, I'm going to be putting joint control morphs on that. There's just no way around that. I have no desire to fight with the skin weights that much. You know, we could get in here and maybe get a little tighter on that, but by the time it's said and done and everything has deformations compounded on top of deformations, you're probably going to end up having to do joint control morphs on this area anyway. So to spend a lot of time in there right now would be kind of a waste of time, and I'm not big on that. So, and that's one of the things that you have to kind of keep in mind with this is learning to have some judgment about where you're going to allocate your own work time, because it's very easy to end up hammering on something for a really long time that probably didn't really need it, that had a much easier, faster way to work through it. So there I've gotten some joint parameters or skin weights together for that leg. I want to go ahead and switch over to the right thigh because I know that one I really don't have anything done for. So I'm going to set that to -90, which sets a key for that leg. And let's just go and make sure that the other leg is zeroed out. So now we're working with just the right thigh. And at frame 10, I'm going to bend it the rest of the way on up. Now here is the first thing that I like to do when I work on a piece of clothing with this particular area, is I will select the piece of clothing itself and go straight to currently used in its parameters. And what this is going to do, if I have show hidden properties turned on in my parameters view, and I go directly to currently used, this is going to show me any of the auto-generated morphs that are the auto-generated JCMs that are currently enabled and having a role in anything. And with the way they're labeled by DAS, you can probably tell what they relate to. So like this one is a JCM, PJCM, thigh forward, 115 right. So it's the right side, and that's 115 degrees. So if I go on down to frame 10, I'm going to see that's 115 degrees right there. So that's actually going to give me 100% of that morph engaged now. So the thing that I want to make sure of, though, is I really don't want any of that morph active. Now, we could go inside the data folders and delete the DUF files for the morph, but it's going to auto-generate, it's going to come back, and then we're going to end up in this situation where we start finding ourselves having things come back in after we thought we had it fixed. And, oh my God, that is so irritating. And there's a workflow for using that method, for deleting the DUF files and working that way and all that. There is a workflow for that, but I'm not fond of it. I don't use it. I don't like it. I've developed a different way of doing it that I'm much more fond of, which is what I'm going to show you now. So here, under currently used, I can see the JCM that is active at the moment, and this is kind of nifty. In DAZ Studio, there are all these little things that look kind of like little cookie cutter, bubble gum, candy coated sort of little dials and dots on things that you're like, oh, there's a little heart on there. What's a little heart for? Oh, and some of the choices they made in their interface to me are to me really kind of silly looking until you get in and figure out what they are and how they work. And I don't know, it's weird. There's some weird stuff under the hood. Really cool stuff that I think is if you're used to, like, I come at this stuff from a background in Maya and Max and other high-end software, and so for me, I look at some of this stuff, and the way that things are presented is oftentimes kind of, it looks goofy on the surface, to be honest. It looks goofy and kind of chintzy, and it just has a silliness to it. But once I realized what the sort of thought process was behind DAZ and the way they made all that stuff, I started to poke around and find things inside that had a logic to them that was really pretty slick and impresses me every time I mess with it. So anyway, all that said, and I think in the live seminars I've talked about that to some degree before, because it's something that I'm kind of fascinated with. They've done some strange things, some things that to me are very strange, but work really well once you get your head around them. So anyway, here we have this little heart, and the little heart, yay, is their little symbol for a favorite, and that, again, it sounds silly to me. It's like, favorite, okay, why would I favorite something? Oh, okay, yeah, it's like I'm gonna turn up the big boob morph and favorite that because I like big boobs. That's a favorite of mine. I mean, come on, it's favorites. It sounds silly. The thing is, there's a function to favoriting something. I think of it less as favorite than I do as highlight this parameter. I think of it as parameter highlighting, but they've called it favorites. Okay, so if you click on the little heart, you're going to favorite that parameter. So here I've made this morph a favorite. And what that's going to allow me to do now that is so incredibly slick is if I go into my geometry editor and I go into vertices and I select all these vertices or any vertices, doesn't matter what, there is a nifty little command. I want to double check and make sure I don't have anything else favorited, which I do. So I want to unfavorite that other thing so that I don't screw it up. So here, right now, I only want the morph favorited, or highlighted, I think of it as highlighting, but set to favorite that I want to remove currently. So in my geometry editor in vertex mode now, I'm going to right click and then go down to morph editing, and there's this little command tucked in here that says clear selected deltas from favorites. So when I do that, you're going to see everything kind of go wonky, which might make you go, oh my god, what just happened to my model? But it's a good thing, because what that just did is that removed that joint control morph from having anything active right now. That removed all these vertices from it. So now that morph is just sitting there dead. It does nothing. And that way, now I can look at my my skin weights and see clearly what's going on. So that's kind of my process, is I like to remove vertices, and I might not always do all the vertices like you saw here. A lot of times I'll do just some vertices in an area that looks like a problem or whatever. Or I might do all of them. It varies. But I'll remove vertices from a joint control morph like that so that I can then tell exactly how my skin weights are interacting with the mesh. And then I can edit skin weights and know that I'm not seeing any conflict from a morph. I'm seeing just the results of my weight editing. Then I'll push my weight editing as far as possible before restoring that morph manually with a sculpted version of it. So the next thing we need to do then is work on those skin weights. So there's a couple things I want to do here first. I want to make sure that I start with just a little area selected here around that thigh, and then expand my selection a tiny little bit. Now let's make my selection brush a little larger. We'll add a little bit more to it. Okay. And then we can also arrow back down my my timeline and finish adding to my selection. So I'm selecting these polygons on the right side that I know I want to operate on with my skin weights. Okay. So there we have that nice selection made. And if you go back and look through some of the live seminars, I have there's one I think maybe even twice recently that I've gone over and talked about how to set up the key commands in DAZ Studio for being able to arrow up and down your timeline. I find that even if you're not going to be an animator or do animation work inside here, being able to use that timeline just to hold different poses and see movement and arrow up and down that's really a great tool for when you're working with skin weights. So let's arrow on down here, and now I'm going to select that right thigh bend and go into my skin weight editor, and now I can start to play around with this. And one of the other added benefits of working on skin weights with a timeline set up the way that I have is I can also just arrow back a couple frames and then reach into a spot that, for instance, like right here, I can't get to those polygons because her leg's in the way, or his leg's in the way. But if I go back a little bit to an earlier stage of the deformation, then I can reach that. And then I can arrow forward and see what the change I just made will do. So that gives me a much more, I would say a little more elegant method of working out my skin weights than if I were to paint a little bit, then move the joint, paint a little bit, and then move the joint. I think it's just a much smoother way to work. Now the caveat there is you have to remember when you're done, before you save everything out, to clear animation off the figures, because DAZ Studio will actually save that and embed the animation, the keyframes and animation data in with your character files. So that's not cool. I kind of wish they didn't do that, but it's not a big deal to remember just to clear that off in the end. So that's what we do. So this area right here, I remember from working on the left side, is a spot where I know I'm probably going to have a little bit of a joint control morph there. That happens quite often when you have a rotation that moves things around a pivot point and also has some JCM that it kicks in that kind of moves mesh around to keep it from pinching there. So that's what's happening, is there's a JCM on the Genesis figure here that is preventing some pinching from happening in this joint, and I'm going to end up having to add some JCM onto my clothing to match that. But right now I want to just push as far as I can with my skin weights before I start inviting any kind of sculpting into things. So here I'm just alternating between the Control and Alt keys from time to time as I paint skin weights. And I'm working at a pretty low amount, about 0.2, about 20% value on my weight brush. Okay. And then I want to keep in mind what my original topology looked like, kind of what the distribution of polygons was in the default position, so that as I weight this, you know, some things you can have some stretchiness, some things you shouldn't. This is something I don't want a whole lot of stretchiness in that area, so I'm going to make sure that I really keep the distribution of those polygons as close to their original evenness as I can and still be able to get a good deformation. Okay. And there's also kind of an artistic side to doing this where you're looking at these shapes, and it's kind of like sculpting in a way. And what you're doing is really kind of sculpting how something's going to interact. So you have a lot of decision making to do on how a piece of clothing is going to act, how it's going to deform around a given area like this. And that's something to keep in mind as you work. Here, I want to make sure I go in and add a little bit more into this area. And again, just as on the outside, this is an area that is such a tight spot that I know going in that I'm going to end up with some JCMs on this. That's just a given. Okay. So now let's walk all the way through to the 115 degrees at frame 10. Now I want to see if I want to take it any further, and I think I do. I think I want to increase this deformation quite a bit. Let's crank up that skin weight. Let's just push this pretty far right now. So I've looked at it with a very light-handed weight, and now I want to take a look at it with something a little more extreme. Okay. So let's work on through here. And then remove a little bit so we dial this back some. This is one of the trickiest places in any piece of clothing. So now let's walk back down through our timeline. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, maybe remove a little bit. Step forward, see what we get. All right. So now I believe this is ready for a morph, to have a JCM added to it. So let's go all the way up to 110 or frame 10, and let's make sure I have Zbrush all cleared out. And we'll just clear out our GoZ cache and start up Zbrush again. So now I'm going to select the underlying figure. And there's a bunch of things hidden on this piece of clothing right now. So when I send this over to Daz Studio, that stuff will all be visible. Or when I send this to Zbrush, that will all be visible there. But that's okay. We'll end up hiding all that real quickly, because we only want to work on this part of the mesh that's visible. Okay. Give this just a moment. There we go. Okay. Now let's fire this up. There we go. Now we can see just the part that we want. Okay. So immediately I'm going to go into my smooth brush, holding the shift key, and I'm going to turn that value down just a little bit. And I think I want to do just a little bit of alteration right here. I've used a transpose tool to do some quick topology-based masking, which is really, really handy stuff. And then I'm just doing a little bit of polishing. Let's pull some of this out, smooth it back. Now, and then if I ever want to get the original shape for this back, all I have to do is unhide everything, store a morph target, come back over to Daz Studio and resend it. And what that will do now is I'll have a state saved that is what I just sculpted, but I'll be able to switch back to the original shape. So I can see a few little things that I want to tweak out. Oh, got to be careful when you're holding that Alt key in Zbrush, because it can accidentally cause it to select the figure underneath. Okay. Now here is always a problem area. And it's this spot where you have the underlying figure is going to intersect on itself, which is going to cause clothing to intersect on itself, and you can end up fighting with this really long and hard if you're not careful. And I'm not fond of having to fight with that, so let's just pull some of this out. We'll do a little bit of polishing on it. And what we want is a logical sort of crease. We want something that makes sense. It can fold in on itself, but it has to make sense when it does it. Just from my experience with product testers, that is, if something creases in on itself and it looks like a mistake, it looks unintentional, and it doesn't seem to make sense, then product testers, most places, are going to kind of get on you for that. Whereas if it makes sense, and that's kind of my general rule on a lot of things, is make it make sense. You know, if you have a deformation added, if you have a joint control morph added or whatever, I mean, keep in mind what we're doing. It's 3D, it's sculpting, it's art, and it's fake. Okay. This is not the real world, and there's a lot of times where people kind of irritate me with some of the things that they want or think they want with this, because they want it to be, oh, you know, is this, you know, why does this move? Why doesn't this move like cloth? Well, it's not cloth. It's not a cloth simulation, and it's not cloth. It's polygons. It's rigid little shapes being manipulated point by point through a matrix of deformers. So it's not going to behave like cloth. Everything that we do to make it look like it behaves like cloth is us faking it. So keep that in mind. Everything you're doing here is faking something so that people, you know, so that it does what they think it should do. It's not really doing what they think it should do, but it should look like it's doing what they think it should do. So anyway, all that to say, an area like this can really give you fits if you let it. Just be aware that you're always going to end up kind of creating some kind of semi-fake sort of shape. Something that is intended to kind of give an impression of what you want and should try to make sense to the end user. As long as you pull that off, you're probably good to go. So if I'm working on something, you know, if we're doing a project for a client that happens to take place in Maya or something like that, where we get the opportunity to use you know, more advanced tools, cloth sims and things like that. In those cases, yeah, we'll do all kinds of crazy stuff that, you know, pushes the realism, does all kinds of neat stuff. But since a lot of what we do is for DAZ Studio and or Poser nowadays, mostly DAZ Studio, you know, this is kind of the name of the game, which is not a bad thing either, because, you know, this is also, like, if we work on something in a game engines have a lot of the same constraints that we have working in, you know, for Poser or DAZ Studio. So really a lot of what goes on in the content world is remarkably similar to things that we see in game development. They have more in common than I think a lot of people would ever dare imagine. And I think that's kind of cool. So I want to change the shape a little bit more now just by pulling a transpose mask out around the edge there and tucking that open edge back inside, because I know that this actually has a bit of a lip to it anyway. And then I'm going to inflate this area so that we kind of play to the illusion of that that lip in the trim. Okay. So let's alter that masking just a touch. Again, we're just going to build up that lip a little bit. Keep in mind the edge flow in that area too, because that can give us a nice guide to work from. All right. And I'm thinking this is just about good to go. One of the nice things too, with that little trick I showed earlier in the geometry editor, where you can select vertices and remove those vertices from a favorited morph. If once we get this over, I find that I've got too much stuff being pulled from the opposite side of the figure, I can just grab those vertices and remove them from the morph a little bit at a time, and kind of walk it back from there a little bit. Right. So now I'm ready to replace that original JCM. We're pretty close to ready. Let's finish this out just a little bit more refinement here. There we go. All right, I think that should be good, especially once this is subdivided in the program. So let's pop back over to DAZ Studio, take a look at our piece of clothing, and go to currently used. We'll go to its root node, and then go to currently used, and there we can see our, or we could go straight to favorites, and there we would see it as well because we have it favorited. Then I'm going to go into parameter settings and just select the name of the morph and hit Control-C to copy it, and then accept. So now back in Zbrush, I want to take a look around and also make sure that these plates are individually rigged. So I know that I really don't need to think about those a whole lot, but I do need to think about these belts. So I want to make sure before I send this over that I've given those belts a look and just given them some movement, some vertical movement that they need to move up with the leg. And then any little tweaks they need just to kind of avoid too many mesh intersections. Okay, so now let's mask all that. And since these plates and the straps are on are individually rigged, we'll hook those in with some different movement later. We do need a little bit of a movement change right here, though. So now let's send this over. Oh, wait. I want to make sure, too. That's interesting. That's very interesting. Looks like I might need to grab my model over here in DAZ Studio, go back into my geometry editor, and let's see. I'm going to make a selection set from what I have currently selected. That is our thigh area. That way, if I need to edit this area again quickly, I can go get to it. But right now, I want to show all my mesh again. So let's show all polygons. And just as I thought, over in ZBrush, I noticed there was some deformation that I hadn't noticed before happening in these plates. And the reason that's there is I think that there's some of that morph, that JCM that we removed. We used that command to remove vertices from a favorited morph. There's some of that morph still affecting vertices that I had hidden at the time. So let's just switch over to vertex mode, and I'm going to go to geometry selection and select all, And we still have that morph favorited, so we can just right click now, go to morph editing, and there you can see it cleared that morph out of every vertex. Okay, so here's our original shape that we sent over, so let's just send this again now and replace that shape. And where we have our sculpt stored inside this morph target, we can just switch out, and now we can just dial back up the original shape that we want for the plates, like that. Now I can make my last little tweak right here, and I know that I still have the name of that morph held in memory, but I'm going to go back through the steps just so you can see it. This is where I'm going to go back over to the root of that clothing figure, and then go to my favorites, find that morph that's enabled, go to my parameter settings, copy its name, and we can just close that dialog. And now I'm going to come back over to Zbrush, hit Control G for Go Z. This is going to bring up our Go Z dialog. The first thing I want to do is go into the basic mode for this. Type in the name. Now you could enter in all kinds of manual stuff for this, but this sets up a few things, and so we only have 2 things to tweak after this. So we'll set that up, and then we'll set it to override existing morph, hit advanced. Then I'm going to right click Delta and ERC links and set that to deltas only. Then we will go into reverse deformations, right click preserve existing deltas and say yes. And now when we hit accept, that morph, right now that morph has no data inside it, it's just sitting there empty. But when we hit accept, this is going to take our shape and shove it into that morph's data and enable it. So now we have a nice clean morph. And if we arrow back down through, we'll see that now that joint control morph follows, our skin weights are nice and clean, and that bit of tweaking on the clothing rig is complete. So that's all I wanted to show you for now in this video. I hope that's helpful. I hope you subscribe and keep up with the CGBytes YouTube channel. My name is Les Garner, also known as 6S1 from 6S1 Media, and I am the Director of Artist Development for CGBytes. We present weekly and soon-to-be bi-weekly seminars, bi-weekly public seminars, and bi-weekly seminars that are exclusively for artists selling their content at CGBytes. So I encourage you to look us up, look up CGBytes, look up the different different aspects of selling your content, moving your artwork through there. Good store, good people to work with. Lots of cool stuff going on there. I'm kind of glad to be part of it. So they're the folks who kind of make it possible for me to come bring these videos to you guys and do all this stuff the way that we do it. So anyway, that's it for now. Look for another video just like this in a couple days, or maybe even tomorrow. Well, I'm not sure. Just depends on how things work out. We're in a kind of the end of the year phase right now, and so because of schedules and things, there's no live shows going on until first week of January. So in the meantime, I'm doing quick videos like this, sort of to showcase some different things I know people have questions about or whatever. And that way, we can kind of keep the information flowing, but let everybody kind of be able to be out on their own holiday schedules and everything. So I hope everyone had a great Christmas, or whatever holiday you celebrate this time of year. And hope everyone has a great new year. So until next time, I'm Les. This is CGBytes. Thanks for watching.